Okay, so this is one of my new molds that I just completed. It's a werewolf mold. It's the front half and the back half. Had a little issue with one small section of the back half that broke off. It's right here, so I'm going to do a quick tutorial on fixing that. Basically, materials I'm going to use for this are just regular white Elmer's glue and some of the plaster bandages that you can find at the craft stores. That'll basically reinforce the back, and then after all of that dries, I'm going to go back in with the original plaster and I'll add some more detail in the crack area. Alright, so let me go ahead and get started. So here you can see I basically put the back half on top of the front half. Depending on where it breaks, reason I did this is so that it'll hold itself up and it'll brace it. That way when I put the pieces on together and glue them, it'll actually be sitting on this little ridge right here, which will actually hold it in place. And it's a lot easier to do it this way than laying it on its back, and then you got to worry about whether the weight's gonna, bring it out or make it fall off. So basically I got a piece there, and this piece here wedges in. And basically that's the inside. You see right here I got a little hole from one of the pieces that broke off I don't have, which I can fill in, and there's a little bit of a gap right there. I'm going to add a little bit there, and I'll add some there, and I can actually work some of the detail back into the plaster after I put it in. But first step is to go ahead and glue this down. So you basically just start off with a good thin layer of glue, and then you'll let that set and dry. Standard regular glue works great. It works just fine. When I first tried doing this, I used regular 5-minute epoxy because of how strong it was and it give a good strong hold. One problem with that is it'll work, you just need to make sure that you don't have any on the inside of the mold, because if you're casting latex out of this and the latex hits the 5-minute epoxy, it'll give you a really thin spot, and sometimes it won't cast right. It can just give you a lot of problems, and it's not something that's easy to clean out of a mold. So regular Elmer's glue holds it, and it'll give it a good strong hold. These plaster wraps do good, and all you have to do with these is just dip them in water and I'll lay them over the back. If you want to go ahead and use burlap dipped in your plaster, you can do that as well. I'm just going to do this as a fast coat, and then the inside I'm going to add a little bit of plaster. You can just apply that with a brush, and then you can actually add in detail. When you're using plaster, what will happen is with making small batches, since it's so thin, it'll start to set a little bit quicker, and you'll actually be able to sculpt into it as it's drying. It'll be almost like a really soft putty type of material. But I'm going to go ahead and let this dry, and then I'll come back to this. Okay, so the Elmer's glue's been drying for a little while, and I'm going to start applying these bandages. Just use a cup of water, and these are what the bandages look like. All they do is you just rip off a few sections of them, and I'm going to put a few layers of this on. These here are actually pretty easy to work with. All you have to do is dip them in water, and the plaster that is already set up in the bandage will react. And this will give the glued section that you just put down more support. Alright, that part's good and set up. I just need to let this dry for a little while, and then I'll show you how to mix up some more plaster to put on the inside. Okay, here's the mold. We see the crack right here and a little bit of a gap. I've done glued it and repaired it, and the back has the plaster bandages on it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill this area right here in with plaster, just to fill in these gaps. We got a slight crack here, but I'm not going to add anything in there. There's not really enough space to add in there, and that's something that I can fix in a latex copy just with a little bit of the Dremel and just seaming tools. So all I'm going to do is basically fill this in with plaster and a nice thin layer, and I should be able to actually add in some details if I need to. Also, I'm just going to be making up a really small batch of this. Alright, so here's a close-up of the area that I need to fix. I've already mixed up a small batch of plaster. And when filling these in, you really don't need a whole lot, and when you're making such a small batch, these areas will actually dry up, or at least start to set up really quickly. So you can actually just go ahead and fill them in as fast as you can. Grab a little bit more. It's probably too much there. And if you see here, it actually is already starting to get to kind of like a mud, like a paste. And you can actually scrape off the excess that's going over the parts that you don't need to finish, and it'll just fill in the gaps. This is a bigger section, so I do need more there. Especially in that front part. the area down here really doesn't have any detail. I didn't go down that far. This is actually just the excess from the undercut from the mask. But you can use basic sculpting tools. You just have to remember to that the mold is the negative area of what you sculpted before. So you just have to remember that when you're sculpting in the details. Now this has started to set, and it has like a putty type of consistency in there now, but it still does need another 20 minutes to a half hour to fully dry before you can use it. But that's basically how I go about fixing, you know, cracks in the mold or gaps, or, you know, if a whole piece breaks off or anything. So there you have it. That's basically how I would go about, you know, fixing gaps or small holes, or, you know, even adding on a whole piece that broke off and repairing a mold. Same basic tools. I just mixed up the plaster that I used to make the mold in a small cup. Just used a popsicle stick for that. I actually cut it in half, cut the other side to a point to get into some of the smaller areas. After it starts to set up, you can actually scrape it off and it'll become like a putty, like an epoxy putty type of material or consistency. Then you can sculpt in the details with whatever sculpting tools you used or needed. I think that's it. I hope this helped you guys out.